Okay, everyone. Well, this is Chris Gardner, who has a company called Vira Natura that does international plant tours. Hopefully, you've read the bit of information we've had on the website, and hopefully, you know Chris is already. But Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm here to talk about Flora, the Tien Shan now. I think it's one of those sort of alluring sort of mountain ranges, really. It's always had that aura of mystery for me, sort of tucked away in Central Asia, sort of straddling the Silk Road and the sort of all the romance associated with that. So very much one of these sort of iconic mountains you want to visit. And until relatively recently, really until the late 90s, it was quite difficult to visit. You couldn't really get in that easily, part of the Soviet Union, etc. That's changed dramatically in the last 25 years. And both getting to Central Asia and traveling around Central Asia is much, much easier. Now, quick map just to ground us as to where I'm going to be talking about. Now, the Tien Shan is a mountain range that runs across the sort of southern part of Central Asia. And by Central Asia, I mean not just the group of stans you see there, but also into parts of far western China as well. Now, on the map, you can see Tashkent, just to give you some idea of where you are. Tashkent, capital of Uzbekistan there. Lake Issyk-Kul, where the Soviets like to test torpedoes years back. And then Tomyrefang, which is the highest peak and sort of sits on the border between China and Kyrgyzstan. But I'll also be looking at the sort of wider Central Asia flora area, because as you can see from that map, you've got the Pamirs sort of coming in below the Tien Shan. And what you effectively have is this whole knot, a complex knot of mountains, and a lot of shared sort of plants across it and similar sorts of plants. And I'll talk about that a bit more as we go. Now, why are there so many shared plants? Well, the most obvious thing, if you look at this map here, is the entire area falls under one huge floristic region, the Irano-Tirano floristic region, which normally is steppe and extends from central Turkey right the way across to western China and quite a long way north as well, as you can see, through Kazakhstan to southern Russia. Now, broadly, it's semi-arid. It has this quite low rainfall figure. You can see the 25 to 50 centimeters of rain, cold winters and hot summers. But there's a lot of latitude. There's a lot of variation, especially where the mountains are concerned, creating sort of different environments, microclimates and niches, etc. Yeah, but broadly, it's all steppe. And so we have similar sorts of habitats and stuff found throughout. Now, obvious things are the high mountain alpine areas, which you'll find in the Tien Shan. We got where there's enough humidity, extensive areas of spruce forest and the like as well. But a large part of it is quite dry, and we have very large extensive steppes, which certainly cover a large part of northern Central Asia. Now, given we've got this huge floristic region, of which everything basically is related, it's not surprising to find a lot of commonality. Now, a quick example here will be the top two flowers there, Raponticoides heroi and Convolvulus compacta. I can find those within an hour's drive from where I'm sitting here in Turkey. The pair below it are found thousands of kilometers away in Kyrgyzstan, but they look broadly very similar. And that's what we find again and again across this whole region. There's a lot of commonality. Another example will be the two winter aconites above, the two Aranthis. On top of which, perhaps unsurprisingly, we have plants which are able to span the entire region. Two examples being Gentiana oliveri, Primula algida. I can find those growing on sort of mountain turf in Turkey. I can also find them right across Central Asia. So, what are the sort of key plants we're going to be finding in such a big region? Well, geophytes are very well represented. Now, geophytes, anything like bulb, corm, tuber, rhizome, anything that has an underground storage organ, plants can retreat underground during the inclement period when it's hot, dry, or even cold. We also find a lot of carrots, the Apiaceae, lots of mints in the Lamiaceae, peas, daisies in the Fabaceae and Asteraceae, lots of borrages, poppies, and also some wonderful members of the Ranunculaceae, the buttercup family, and you can see one there, top right, Trollius altaicus, which occurs in great numbers in parts of Kyrgyzstan. Okay, so we'll begin. I'll begin sort of the furthest extremity, if you like. We'll begin down in the sort of the Pamir Ally and the edges of the Pamir, which sort of spread across Tajikistan and into parts of Uzbekistan as well. And I've marked a couple of things on there, principally capital of Tajikistan, Dushanbe, but also the little rather unusual finger of Kyrgyzstan, where we find a place called Batken. You'll realize why a bit later on. Now, Tajikistan was one of those really the towns which was hardest to visit. In fact, it didn't really open up until sort of about 2011. I first went there. There'd been a civil war. There was all sorts of conflicts, and it wasn't safe to visit. Now you can go, and it's a wonderfully scenic country. This has probably got the highest percentage of mountains in any of the stans, if you like to call it. There's relatively little cultivatable land, so what you do find are plunging valleys, little villages nestled in the bottom, like you can see here, cultivating fruits and small areas, small gardens and the like. So there's not a tremendous amount of agriculture goes on there. However, the flowers are wonderful. And this was my first, not quite my first taste of Central Asia, my first taste of Tajikistan. And you get here in late March, early April, and you've got wonderful drifts of things like Crocus corii, Tulipa praestans, well-known garden forms, still very widely grown, and some beautiful fritillarias as well. These are all fairly typical sort of Central Asian plants. Also a lovely suite of anemones. These three species can all be found there, evident from these lovely sort of gentle drifts of Chernoii and the vibrant anemone bucarica. Anemone cupiculiolosa is a very widespread species found across a lot of Central Asia. Corydalis, two very different species here. The rather lovely Popovii and this sort of rather unusual spikes of nudicoli, but we find many species of interest in Corydalis in Central Asia as well. And of course, there are the irises. I think these are the one the most sought after of all of the genera that people go to see, often called Junos in the Scorp iris group of irises. And we find sort of a succession of these changing as we move through Central Asia. But each of the countries has a wonderful selection. Tajikistan, you can find Iris bucarica, and boy, can you find it. And it occurs by the hundreds of thousands. There are valleys which are just lined with it for kilometre after kilometre. Huge populations of this. Also, other spots you can find beautiful things like Rosenbeckiana as well, and a whole variety of others. Now, just across from where those Iris bucarica were, you can sort of, if you were able to fly straight across, which is difficult in Central Asia because the borders are so complicated politically. So it makes the shortest journey can end up taking a day just to get around the other side of the mountain you started on. Now, one example is the Hisar range, and it sort of comes into Uzbekistan, and on it we find the wonderful Taktukaraja Pass. Now, this is a really rich area. Here we find more different, beautiful Juno irises. Iris walleensis, one of my favorites. This is an absolutely gorgeous plant, and you catch it just right in the right year, and it's a very, very beautiful iris. Often growing quite close to Iris magnifica, or as its name suggests, this is a big, tall species which can be found growing in sort of on granite rocks and granite areas with Tulipa fosteriana, which was a forerunner for many of our showy tulips grown in gardens today. But those two go right next to each other on the Taktukaraja Pass. Elsewhere, we find lots more and different Corydalis, some unusual forms of Ledoboriana, Americandica, and just to make it more complicated, these two do hybridize here as well, just to make it really confusing. A rather unusual plant, bottom right, will be Primula fecuncoana. There aren't many primulas that grow what I would consider truly in steppe. Many of them need a humid environment that retains some moisture throughout the summer, but these hills completely fry, bone dry in summer, but this pretty little primula comes up in spring, flowers, and then retreats back until the next year. Also growing around all this, and something that's quite characteristic of Central Asia, are these really big, hefty herbs. And they start in the spring with these enormous fennels that come up everywhere. And you might find alongside that commonly things like cranberry and some really robust astragalus. And many of these sort of meadows and and communities, especially where we've got quite a lot of grazing, can have impressive numbers of these really robust plants. Another classic example of Central Asia is the foxtail lily, Eremurus. Now, there are probably around 40 species or more in Central Asia. It's far and away, it's the real world center of this particular genus. And they can occur in spectacular abundance, as I've already said, especially where there's a lot of grazing, because that tends to select for these unpalatable plants, but they form these amazing displays. We'll see how that contrasts with other areas later on where grazing regimes are different. Below that, a few more examples of what you might find in early summer, including the plant I mentioned earlier, Gentiana oliveri, the same plant I can find growing in central Turkey as well. Now, just nipping back into Tajikistan, because I want to show you once more these big herbs and how they form these impressive meadows, dominated by relatively few species, but you have these large phlomoides, big fennels, and big polygonums, all these really robust, strong plants forming these incredible big, tall meadows. Close by, you'll find other Eremurus, things like Stenophilus, beautiful species that I very much wanted to see in Tajikistan. The real surprise I had here was the Lathera smallcake. I'd never even heard of it until I got there. And it's one of the most impressive sweet peas I think I've seen anywhere in the world. Forms huge billowing sort of hummocks that sort of tumble over rocks and even on scree, full of flowers in early June. However, I had really gone there just for one plant. Some years ago, many of you probably know I wrote Flora, the Silk Road. And on doing that book, there was always a few plants that irritated me I couldn't include. And this was one of the ones, top of my list in Central Asia, was the quite singular Ostrowskia magnifica. Maybe a bit hard to appreciate just how big these bells are, but they're sort of 3 or 4 inches across, bigger than any Canterbury bell you've ever grown. And these plants can be sort of 4, even 5 feet tall at times. A quite magnificent plant, really most common in Tajikistan. And as it turned out, I found them on several occasions. I thought I was really going to struggle. I'm never going to find this plant. It's going to be so difficult. And in the end, they were turning up, I wouldn't say everywhere, but quite frequently, including, and the left hand one was photographed, I wouldn't quite say a stone's throw from the Afghan border, but I wasn't very far away from that particular country. And so they almost certainly also grow across in Afghanistan. And just for interest, if you ever wondered what the border with Afghanistan and Tajikistan looks like, it looks like this. It's a river. This is the Panj River that separates these two countries, the two ideologies. One side, you've got nice smooth tarmac. The other side, just a rough dirt track. One side, you've got girls going to school in colourful dress. On the other side, they're lucky they don't go to school at all. Just one river separating these two very, very different countries. Someone's got a dog barking. We need a mic muted. Now, you can't go to Central Asia and ignore the amazing culture, especially sort of in Uzbekistan, where we have the 3 sort of classic places, starting with Khiva in the far west. These are all former sort of the emirates or whatever that used to govern these, and there's all sorts of stories associated with it. What they all have in common is this fabulous Timurid architecture. Bukhara is an absolute delight just to wander around. It's like a big open-air museum, really. And then, of course, there's its slightly brasher cousin, Samarkand, which for me is kind of, it is the Silk Road. If you think of any one town on the Silk Road, it's this one. And many of the buildings have been restored to really magnificent state, beautiful tile work, wonderful brickwork, lovely places to visit. Okay, so once we've done our cultural bit, got on the train, whizzed to Kyrgyzstan, and then driven 5 hours back across the desert because the borders are so complicated, we eventually come to a wonderful reserve near a town called Batken, where they preserve Fritillaria edwardii. Now, this spectacular plant, which is, as you can see, very similar to Imperialis, very closely related, still occurs here in large numbers. And there were 1 or 2 other spots nearby as well. We have hundreds of these impressive bulbs. The problem elsewhere in the range, especially Tajikistan, is them being picked by young boys to sell by the roadside. And it makes accessible populations harder and harder to reach. You can see them up on high cliffs, and that's about it. So it's very refreshing. You actually have this specific botanical reserve that exists in Kyrgyzstan and the nearby areas that still preserve this incredible plant. Now, not just this plant grows in this area, we also have another little delight with the beautiful Tulipa rosea, quite singular color, incredible sort of reddish pink, growing on this really austere sort of stony step. It grows alongside some of the other plants I've showed there, things like Aremostachys and the pretty Arnebias, and also various sort of horn poppies like Glaucium. Now, some of these certainly are represented again in other parts of this big Irano-Tirano region I keep talking about. We can find wonderful displays of poppies in Turkey. We can find wonderful displays in Kyrgyzstan as well. And all of these elements just keep playing out again and again, similar plants across this entire region. However, as I said already, Eremuris are far more represented in Central Asia than anywhere else. And for me, one of the most impressive of all is Eremuris alberti. This is quite a rare plant, quite particular about where it grows. It likes these lovely, deep, earthy soils. And you can, in the right place, come across wonderful populations of many of these things, but they're far from common. But a quite spectacular plant. And you can see as it develops there, it gets older and older, it gets even more impressive with all these wonderful developing fruits beneath. A quite magnificent species of Eremuris. Not quite as showy, but just a point of interest, really. We all like pistachios. We all like eating the nuts, flavored ice cream, all sorts of things. But did we know they came from Central Asia? You can still find large areas of semi-natural or even fully wild pistachio vera all across, especially in Kyrgyzstan. And of course, this was the origin and still is the source of all the pistachios we eat. And Central Asia really has been a bit of a crucible for all these fruits we depend on. We also find here apricots, we get apples from there, pears, and various other things as well. A very important source of our fruits. Now, as summer progresses, in this same area, we get lots of meadows come up, but these don't necessarily last so long. You're getting well into June, a lot of this has started to dry out, although we do have some rather lovely things and familiar things like Achillea turning up then. But we need to gain a bit of height, really. Okay, so we need to get into the mountains, we need to get into the Tien Shan. Now, this little graphic here shows really the extent of the Tien Shan, beginning near Tashkent at Chimgan. I'm going to start at the western end, which is a little bit drier. As you move east, it gets a little bit wetter, and the composition of the flora starts to change a bit. And we'll progress sort of from west to east, and I'll progress, as I've done already, seasonally at the same time, so you get a feel for how the season changes at the different locations. Okay, we'll move on to Aksucibagli and then some of the spectacular passes of Kyrgyzstan and past Ishikul and so on. Now, just a few facts and figures about the Tien Shan. It's about 1,500 miles. It's got about 800 endemics. And as I've already said, on the cooler slopes, we do get forests and shrubby vegetation. The drier southern slopes tend to be much barer than that. Geologically, it's complex. Okay, the main period of mountain building was 380 to 300 million years ago, but there was much older rocks as well. And it's a complex series of faults and basins, different rocks overlying one and the other. The result of that is lots and lots of niches, lots and lots of opportunities for different plants. So beginning with Chingan is a good example of this muddled geology. Here we have limestone sitting on top of granite and various other things as well. Lots of deep valleys with streams running through, creating other microclimates. And it's not surprising that this area is very rich. You've got about 1,600 species occurring in Chingan, which is more than the entire UK. Now, in spring, it all bursts into action once the snow recedes. We get wonderful, wonderful drifts of Crocus alatavicus, often mixed with this interesting member of the Berberis family, Gymnospermium alberti. We have different Corydalis, different forms of Corydalis lediboriana, which we'd already seen down in Chaktikaraja Pass, and various other species also occurring, sometimes, as you can see there, in really great quantities. And of course, we have tulips. Now, I think Central Asia really, for me, is kind of synonymous with the tulip. The two plants I think of is tulips and foxtail lilies. They're the two things I think that really stand out for me in the flora. And Chingan is particularly rich. This, for varied geology, only adds to that. You can find beautiful things like Tulipa dubia growing on these granitic gravel slopes. Tulia carvii growing on limestone in adjacent valleys. And then all over the place, countless numbers of things like Bifloriformis. And it's not surprising all this mixing and muddling has created sort of hybrids and an awful lot of confusion, quite frankly, as to what half these things are. What they are is lovely. And a couple of other examples here that are commonly found in this general area will be Kaufmanniana and Greigii. Now, of course, we grow these widely available as cultivars in the garden today, as popular as they ever were. But it's a delight always to see these things in the wild. You sometimes really can't quite believe you're looking at the very same thing as you might be growing or putting so much effort into growing, and there they are growing by the thousand with no one looking after them at all. Tulip Micheliana doesn't grow anywhere near these other two. I put that in because it's rather similar to Greigii, just to show the similarities for the different species. This one occurs much further west and in drier parts of Uzbekistan and Iran. We've got other Erymuris, the beautiful Lactiflorus, also flowers at the same time as these tulips. One of the loveliest, another of the loveliest Erymuris. And we've got a couple of really striking frits as well. Stenanthera and the very tall, can be very tall, Ceratzoii. And as we move on into summer, these meadows really start to spring up. Different Erymuris come through. We've got the huge Robustus, and these can be 2 meters tall. Magnificent spikes. Large numbers of other species as well, Erymuris reguli, and some beautiful irises such as Iris coei, and a whole confusion of alliums if you really want to get into your alliums. But the meadows just keep developing as summer moves on, and if you just walk up the valleys, you'll find huge quantities of polygonums. You find rhubarbs, which in Central Asia people are happy to eat the stalks raw. They're often sold by the roadside, especially in April. They'll harvest all these things raw from the hillsides, and then you just sort of peel it off, dip it in salt, and just crunch away. They wouldn't dream of putting sugar with it and boiling it to death. Roses we find a lot of. Roses are very numerous and diverse in Central Asia. They revel in this sort of drier climate. A lot of species of rose, and that little valley you can see on the top left, if you kept going up to where that snow patch is and a bit round the corner, if you're lucky in the right year, you'll find beautiful stands of peony as well. Now, just over the border, as I say, these borders are complicated. You can't just go over the border in Central Asia. You've got to make this long journey round to the other side. But if you just went over the border into Kazakhstan, you'd reach Aktu-Jabagli, which is a very special reserve, principally because there's been no grazing here for over 100 years. And that means you've got these really diverse, rich meadows. Now, although you can see great displays of Ligularia there, especially in the wet areas, this is quite normal. What you don't see are these great displays of Erymuris and other plants, which are rather selected for by grazing. Instead, you've got a much richer sort of meadow matrix. A couple of other examples here. Beautiful Aquilegia atravenosa, one of the most gorgeous Aquilegias I think I see anywhere. And that great global traveler, Anemone narcissiflora, which is pretty much circumboreal. That can be found in many guises all around the Northern Hemisphere. Now, once again, if you can put your hiking boots on and look into the picture on the top left and hike up to the base of those cliffs, you'll find the 3 beautiful flowers that I show below. Stephanocarimolgi, the lovely Parrot Aquilegia, always a delight to see wedged in rock crevices all across Asia, and then the lovely Primula minquitzii. Continuing east, we've skipped countries, but as I said, we've got to ignore these borders and just sort of follow the geography. We reach a very large reservoir called Toktogul, and around this, there's a rich array of different plants turning up, beginning with magnificent stands of Iris alberti in all sorts of colour forms. We see the first of this whole confusion of these red and yellow tulips, which I've here just called Faganica. So anyone who thinks otherwise, stop screaming at me. I've just lumped everything tonight because they're very, very confusing. This one may now be called Toctogolica, but they are all rather similar. Quite distinct, though, is Allium carataviense. For me, the most spectacular allium I think you'll find in Asia. And you find them in these coarse screes, incredible big-leaved alliums, often with this rather charming little Chesnea growing alongside. Now carry on up that same road where you've just gone past those alliums, you've gone past those irises, and you keep going up. You might have seen a clump of Iris grayberi on the top right there. But suddenly the snow gets more plentiful and the vegetation has only just got going. It's early spring. But if you hit it on a good year, the quantity of Colchicum luteum is absolutely mind-blowing. They are there by the million upon million. As you can see here, they color the ground golden. But what's interesting is you keep going up over the pass, you go down the other side, and at some point, this transitions to Colchicum kesselringianum, and you don't see another luteum the rest of the time. And the next mountain pass is covered in countless Colchicum kesselringianum instead. Now, tulips, a few more tulips. Kyrgyzstan is every bit as rich as areas to the west. A few more examples here. As you can see on the right, they can occur in quantity. Often tulips, when you do find them, are very common. Wonderful combinations of colors like you find as a Straussiana, a whole mix of things. Or familiar stuff like Tulip attarda, commonly grown in gardens, but so nice to see it growing in its wild home on sort of stony banks. Just opposite, actually, where these other two species were photographed. It was interesting. They don't actually grow together, but just on opposite sides of the valley. Now, once again, if you can just put your geographical hat on and hop over the border, almost quite literally due north, you will find, I think, the most beautiful tulip in the whole of Central Asia, and that is Tulip reguli. The extraordinary crinkle-leaved beauty that grows in sort of just a few locations, just the right sort of bit of stony ground and the right slope and everything. And these gorgeously fragrant tulips can occur in quite good numbers in southern Kazakhstan. And not so far away, I think you also find what is arguably the most beautiful of all the frits that occur in this area. Carolinii also grows there. And I throw in Iris kozakowiczii just because those three just look so beautiful together. And they all occur in southern Kazakhstan in the very early spring, late March and early April. If we fast forward again, push into summer again, see how things change. Well, huge quantities of Eremeris, no surprise really. This time it's Eremeris tienshanicus appearing, one of the most elegant of the later flowering ones. We also find fuscus. Now, fuscus can occur in numbers, again, that you wouldn't believe, especially on these slopes like the Alabel in Kyrgyzstan, where there's heavy grazing and they occur by the million. And the whole flowering season begins in April and continues on into July as they open in succession as the snows recede. Quite incredible populations. And indeed, as you go up through all these meadowlands, you see this sort of thing played out with these sort of generally unpalatable plants dominating the grasslands, things like these beautiful Firmoides. Now, these are all in the Lamiaceae, the mint family, which also contains things like Scutellaria. This is another very characteristic genus in Central Asia. Lots of different, very beautiful species commonly found there. Now, push on further, you get right up over the top, and it's quite incredible, the Alabel in June. If you hit it on a good day and the sun's out, the quantity of Primula algidea has to be seen to be believed. They are countless, truly. They truly paint the landscape pink over a very large area. Once again, the livestock don't touch them. So the primulas absolutely dominate this short turf. In places, things like Myosotis also put on a show. And in the damper areas, we're more likely to find more of the Trollius altaicus, the alliums, and even a few orchids. Orchids don't do well in steppe. They're not steppe plants. Always we find them in humid places, little marshes and bogs. But this one, Dactyla rhizombrosa, occurs from Central Asia right through to Eastern Turkey, a very big range indeed. Now, sticking with these slightly more humid environments, a couple of interesting spots that perhaps you wouldn't think of occurring in Central Asia. Walnut forest. Walnuts come from Central Asia, and you can still find some areas of sort of semi-natural walnut woodland tucked away in the hills of the western or central Tien Shan. And of course, the very, very different environment. We find beautiful sort of dainty things like Aquilegia vicaria and large quantities of Dictamnus albus and other sort of more humid loving plants there. Another example, fairly close to the walnut forest, is the biosphere reserve of Sari-Chilek. This is another example of an area that does not sustain heavy grazing. And as such, you can see immediately from those meadows, they're quite rich and varied and diverse. And Obviously, moving on, the one thing that always strikes you is how quickly things can change in Central Asia. I've already said the northern slopes are more humid. They tend to be more vegetated. Once you get over onto the other side, it's all changed. A lot of these spectacular dry areas, very colorful rocks, and very, very different plants. Things like these linares, this beautiful chesnea, and various borrages as well. They're far more normal. We find these cushion-forming things. Very similar plants can also be found all the way across into Turkey. And even the same species in the case of Onobrychus cornuta, a plant which ranges over a vast area. But these are well designed both to resist grazing and also desiccation. They're very well adapted to these hot steppe environments. Now, I've alluded to these plants which are widespread, and you've got even more examples here. In fact, some of these span the entire Mediterranean and across to Central Asia is quite remarkable. Things like Carduus nutans, Salvia sclaria. And if it isn't that exact species, once again, it's something that looks remarkably like it. Poppies I've already talked about, but as we start to go up and get into better water places, we can find some spectacular displays appearing in the spring. Beautiful mixture, this time slightly still poppies, but a different mix than I might find further west in Iran and Turkey, for example. Here we have lots of ramerias and these beautiful glauciums. And if you dive down among them, you can't possibly see it from the top photo, you will find this wonderful purple Orobanchia amona graying in among all those lovely poppies. But if you keep going up, as I said, you eventually reach some of these wonderful highland areas, some of these wonderful passes in Kyrgyzstan. Some of you may have already heard of Songkul. It's this wonderful high elevation lake, I think about 3,500 meters or something like that. And it's ringed by mountains, as you can see, and these little sinuous roads which lead up and down to get to the pass, where you get lots of people bringing up their livestock, their yaks and horses for the summer. Now, on the way up, you have one of the most bizarre and interesting thistles I can think of, Schmalhausinia, wonderful name too, Schmalhausinia nidulans, which looks like a wonderful little clock tower of thistle flowers. You have some beautiful alliums and lots more trollius. There's another very special plant as well, but I'll show you that a bit later on. Get to the snowmelt and get to the rocks, we start to see lots of interesting alpine plants. We've got Androcetes, we've got Dracocephalum. Now, Dracocephalum is another of those very significant genera in Central Asia, lots of different varied Dracocephalums. Another one shown here, this time going down that wonderful sinuous road I showed you. We go up one way and we come down that road. In fact, we invariably end up walking down that road because there's so many flowers to see on the way, including this incredible Onebia euchroma. I showed you Onebias earlier. I showed you a golden one with purple, and I showed you a pink one. Well, here's yet another one, an incredible near black one. And we've also got some interesting primulas and corydalus as well. Now, the primula has a bigger brother. It's much more common, and often in sort of humid river valleys and things that are sort of off from the main valleys. You'll find it growing here, often with Codonopsis clematidia. And look at that gorgeous inside of that flower. Only really intended for bees. And it's well worth sort of craning your neck and getting down, or even lying down among them, or falling down among them even, and looking up at the flowers. Other beauties in this area, once again, Paracollegia, common on all the rocks, any of the rocks in the area, and this beautiful Fritillaria as well. But that all changes once you head down towards Issyk-Kul. Large areas of Central Asia, a lot of the lakes are quite saline. This was an area of great uplit. All these basins kept a lot of salt in them. And as such, we find these halophytic plants dominate, things like Ephedra, Cynomorium, and even Iris halophylla, all very well adapted to deal with these salt-rich habitats. You have some interesting areas next to these, wonderful canyons. Kyrgyzstan, all these areas are full of these incredible rockscapes, all these colored rocks and stuff. And if you look carefully in there, you have these big billowing masses of things like Clematis songarica, different Dracocephalums, of course. And a relative of that, Lagophyllus, which is a beautiful member of the mint family, and several species found across the region. I'll show you some more a bit later on. But keep going inland and keep going south on the old branch of the Silk Road. and you'll eventually reach a place called Barskoon. This is one of my fave places in Kyrgyzstan. And you'll go through all these pencil spruce forests. This will transition to these thin roads you see going up there, past these enormous screes. I mean, some of the biggest screes I think I've seen in the world are here, and of course in China, but Central Asian China just has unbelievable screes. And you eventually get to this incredible lakeland. Now, this is photographs taken in mid-June, and you can see that it looks like winter has barely left. Now, on the way up the screes, we have one of the finest primulas you're going to find in the region. We have the unusual Desideria and lots of Callianthum alatavicum. Up on the turf itself, masses and masses of ranunculus around these icy ponds. And the weather up here can change in an instant. I've set off in sunshine before now for a 1-hour walk and ended up coming back in a driving blizzard. It changes that fast. You always have to come prepared when you come up here. You're almost at 4,000 meters. It's cold and highly unpredictable. But I come up here for one very, very special reason. This is my favorite plant in Central Asia, and that's Trollius lilacinus, which in certain places occurs by the thousand. An extraordinarily beautiful, I call her the ice queen. And on a good blue sky day, those lovely crispy flowers really do have this ice blue tint. When it's grayer, they still have this wonderful shape and form of the flowers that sort of stands out even more in flat light. An extraordinary plant, difficult to grow, one you really do have to go and experience in this incredible wilderness. Keep going east. We're going to the next pass along now, up through more of these developing meadows. Lots and lots of monkszhoods developing, these big veratrums, and lots of other really showy leafy herbs developing until we push on up further, get once again into the alpine zone. Big range of alpines, we find it. Everything from Edelweiss, pink dandelions. We've got lots of saxifrages, salsarias, geraniums. And then these jellyfish of Chorospora bungiana, an extraordinary plant. And this is actually in the cabbage family, Brassicaceae, as is Erysimum humilumum. And I wish at this point I could give you the fragrance of the area, because this particular wallflower smells absolutely delicious. But the star plant for me, despite all that wonderful smell of the Erysimum, is Corydalis fecuncoana, one of the most beautiful Corydalis. I think you'll find it anywhere in the world. It just grows on a few areas of this very sort of coarse, chunky scree, up in the very high, we're at about 3,500 meters, very high parts of Kyrgyzstan. And when you do get to the top, you get this magnificent view on towards the Inchalek, and Inchalek glaciers beyond there, sort of a bit of a climbing, trekking mecca, almost at 4,000 meters here at the pass. And if you glance to your right, you would see Potentilla biflora growing on the rocks. Now, what's interesting about this, although that photograph actually there is taken in India, is that this plant occurs all the way from here, right the way down to the Himalaya. It's another example, a different example this time of plants with these huge distributions. And the arrows indicate where the two pictures were taken. One's taken up there in Kyrgyzstan, and then thousands of kilometers away. Through all these mountain chains, the very same plant is growing in Himachal. Another example with that lovely Codenopsis I showed you earlier. They, I wouldn't say grow together, but they grow in more or less the same area. Very wide distribution, showing there are also connections between the Himalaya into parts of the Tien Shan, as well as the steppe areas further to the west. Now carry on across those steppes. To begin with, at least, as you come down from the foothills, they're still nice and green. You've got wonderful displays of things like Linomolgi and Diathron tienshanicum. Beautiful Verbascum, Phoenicium, wonderful spikes of purple sort of popping up among it all. And even a few orchids, again, where it's humid enough. But this can change in an instant in Central Asia. Suddenly you're back in what you perhaps associate more readily with the old Silk Road. Fabulous, colourful rockscapes, sand dunes, and really much more austere climates. This is in Altin Emel in Kazakhstan, an extraordinary scenic area. And top left is the Charin Canyon, an equally sort of rugged, sort of cleft into the ground that you find in southern Kazakhstan. But not so far away and where you were seeing all that lush greenery. So it's not surprising, given that you've probably got really quite a tough lifestyle. Most of the people were nomadic, they were herding their animals, moving from place to place. You didn't get the same amount of settled development. You didn't get many cities or towns developing. What you find instead of these people are simpler things. Many petroglyphs, many examples of petroglyphs all across this southern Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, places like that. You find balbals, which were carved. These appeared a bit later on. And later on, you do find the old caravanserai tied to the Silk Road that used to flow through parts of Kyrgyzstan and over into China. And it's when you get into China that is a bit of a shift. Because here, because of China further to the east, you had far more development of more settled cultures. You had these fantastic Buddha caves that you get in places like Kuchi. And even now you can go in and some of the reliefs are still really rather wonderful. You also have some fortifications and protections for these routes, such as this beacon tower in Kuchi. Although a lot of it has to be said, is just falling apart. Much of this sort of country, the available materials were just sort of clays, and things were built of a brick that really didn't last that long. So they literally just dissolved back into the semi-deserts. Now, a big chunk of the Tien Shan actually runs into China. This is probably the least visited part of all. You can see by the map there, it all still falls in this big floristic region I've been talking about. But you can see Xinjiang, this western province of China, encompasses an enormous area and an enormous spread of mountains. Down in the south, you've got this sort of knot of the Kunlun Shan, the Karakoram, and the Pamir, also joining with the Tien Shan and the Pamir Ally, an absolute complex of mountain ranges, which eventually yield to the Tien Shan, which runs away up to the northeast there, and then on quite a ways into the northeast for petering out in the desert. You'll also find within this big floristic province is the Altai Mountains to the north and some lesser ranges running up towards them. So we'll now have a look at Xinjiang, which is a place I'd never been until last year. And certainly scenically, it's absolutely spectacular. You have these incredible landscapes of colored rocks, these deeply eroded valleys, and you get up higher, these enormous peaks with big glaciers running through them still. It was certainly scenically spectacular. Perhaps personified by the world's highest rock arch, Shipton's Arch, tucked away near Kashgar. This was really rather splendid. We even found a few really lovely plants as well, things like Corydalis bucarica growing there as well. But much of the area on that Chinese side is fairly saline, and the diversity is not that great. We didn't find the sort of rich array of plants I was perhaps hoping for. We found lots of capers, lots of tamaricks, things like zygophyllum, all well adapted to this saline conditions. Other things like limonium, and even the acantholymanns, once again, very similar to what we'd find much further to the west. Pleasant surprise was Clematis tangutica. This is a plant I would find in Qinghai or in Sichuan, way away to the east. So another example of a plant which has been able to travel a really great distance. And get up high, you do find some delights. Wonderful big clumps of Iris loxii and drifts of Iris lactea as well. But it wasn't anywhere near as rich as I've been used to finding, say, in Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan. And that didn't really change until we'd reached the Tien Shan proper. Now here you drive up through these dry sort of valleys and then up and over this spectacular ranges, snow-clad ranges, and then incredible views over vast pencil spruce forest. I have to say, it has some of the best views I think I've ever seen anywhere in the Tien Shan. Really quite spectacular. What you don't see is the amount of traffic there was. The pass only opens on a certain date, and it seems like half of China's waiting to do the drive. And so there's constant cars driving up and down the road, and this whole sort of manic tourism going on, which came as a real surprise to me. I thought it would be sort of rutted sort of dirt tracks and hardly anyone else. It has to be said, we were the only foreigners there. and everyone was absolutely delightful and charming and happy and wanted their picture taken with us. We felt like movie stars half the time. You can get away from all of this if you find a little off-road that goes up, like in the bottom left there, goes up to a higher area. And once again, you're reunited with things like Troilus lilacinus, and also beautiful things like Viola altaica and Tulipa altaica as well. What we find now is a lot of these geophytes, a lot of these bulbs, the diversity has really dropped quite sharply from when we were further west in Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. Very, very few species, actually. And the names of those is kind of giving a bit of a hint. Things are changing. We're getting further north now. And we're starting to get close to those Altai mountains I was talking about. Now, come down off of that ridge I was just on, negotiate the traffic and the craziness that was going on below, and you'd find yourself in a valley absolutely filled with flowering roses as well. And you were close once again to these large areas of steppe, and you were starting to see those sort of familiar plants again, the beautiful Agacylus, alliums, and dianthus and the like. But lots and lots of steppe flora appeared again, and I wish I'd had more time because there were some beautiful plants. Things like these astragalus, all sorts of shapes and forms of these extraordinary sort of members of the pea family. These are diverse right across this Tirana floristic province. Many, many species in Turkey, many here in Xinjiang. And it was interesting just to see how that continued across the whole region. A few more examples of the steppe plants here. Another Dracocephalum, yet again, Toflaxes and lovely vetches, and this very impressive stock as well, Matiola superba. But once it did get a bit greener, once you again gained a bit of height or got to an area that was better watered, it all changed again. Vast stands of Dictamnus albus, thousands of plants spread out. And other areas that have a whole hillsides, I do not exaggerate, hillsides covered in Peony animala. Wonderful, wonderful displays. And then push on that bit further again, and you really see it's changing. You're starting to see plants that you might find in the Alps, like Clematis integrifolia. And the forests are much thicker and richer and more diverse. This pencil spruce has gone. You've got different plants. You've got larches appearing. It's very much changed. It's that much colder. You're getting near to Siberia. And of course, the plant I actually wanted to see most of all is the Everthronium sibericum, an absolutely stunning plant that grows right near the melting snow. Beautiful. It's like a souped up Everthronium dens canis, much, much larger. Wonderful, wonderful plant. And if you just keep going and make it up to the saddle overlooking Mount Beluga, you'll see these gorgeous gentians. And this is really, as far as I'm concerned, this is the end of the line. This sits on the border between Kazakhstan and Russia. Mongolia is not far away. And it's sort of a wonderful sort of final note on really the Tien Shan and Central Asia, this wonderful big region in Asia. Okay, so I will stop there and I'll stop my share. And then if anyone's got a question, I'm happy to answer.
I wanted to ask you, what time of year did you see? You obviously didn't go in one particular month.
No, I've actually lost count of how many times I've been out Central Asia, but principally I'll be going in April, May, June. Those 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months.
Because I went to Tajikistan last month for a couple of weeks doing the Pamir Highway. By then there were virtually no plants, and it was cultural and heritage rather than botanical.
There's very little.
I've just seen everything I've missed.
We have to go back.
Superb talk, by the way. Lovely photos.
Thank you. It's a very intriguing area. It always has been, and there's still lots and lots of little corners and things to find.
Thanks, Chris. We're listening to you from New Zealand.
Oh,
and really look forward to traveling with you one day. The plants look terrific. We went to Kyrgyzstan a couple of times last year, and but there's obviously a lot more to see.
Yeah, many a sort of little nook and cranny that needs exploring there. It's a huge.
So what have you got lined up for next year?
I'll be there in April next year. and then I'll probably be back there in June the following year. You just can't cover it all in one go. And I like to try and, I mean, the borders are what make it difficult. You've got to juggle with these borders because, you know, on the map it all looks fairly close, so you have to kind of plan these fairly complicated itineraries which try and get you to all these things. But it's just, I mean, I love traveling in Asia. There's a great freedom and space to it, as you would have experienced in the Pamir.
Yeah.
No fences.
It was a long way.
Yeah. No keep off the grass.
Well, I'll add a few things, Chris. I couldn't believe it. And then Narcissa Flora was there.
Yeah. It's I mean, they try and split it into various things, but you know, it's all the same plant. It's just everywhere.
Amazing.
I've seen it in Japan. I see it in Turkey. I mean, it's in North America. It's just, you know, spread across the world. Varies a little bit here and there, but you know, it depends. Lumper or splitter, it kind of depends. I tend to think they're all one and the same incredible plant that's just got around.
Yeah, and all those tulips, and like let's say, it always amazes me when you go to the wild and you see plants like the tulips, the things that you grow in your garden and struggle to, and then they are a plant that just grows in the wild somewhere.
Well, of course, that's how they all originate. It had to come from somewhere, didn't it?
Yeah.
What's always heartening when you go out to places like that, there's still plenty of it. I mean, you go to places and it's sort of, you know, no shortage of these things a lot of the time. You can't beat the landscape.
Yeah,
it's just an incredible place to be traveling.
Okay, does anyone else have a question at all?
Are you arranging your tour through the AGS, or is it?
We are now doing some of the AGS, not that particular one. That's one of our Vira Natura ones. The AGS haven't come to us for that one yet, but we will be doing some stuff various places with the AGS as well.
What's the one you just mentioned?
The tour in Central Asia.
Yeah.
That's in H. So that Vira Natura is my company.
What's
Ollie can give you the.
Right.
I'm sure you can pass on the address there, and then we'll be there. I'll be there sort of late March, April, going around the stands and all these fritillaries and irises and tulips and stuff. It'll be. That's why I go there then. And then if you want to see the Ice Queen, you have to go again in June because she flowers later on. But yeah, always an excuse to get back.
Chris, if I could ask one more question. If you go in July, I'm assuming that the later you go, the higher you go, you can still see some of these things later in July, even into August?
I don't know about August. You get into July, you certainly would, as long as you get up to areas with a bit of snow. You'll still have a lot of these things hanging on, and then other things will start to appear. You'll get some of these gentians start to turn up. Maybe some of the salsarias are coming to flower. It all depends. Whereas lower down, a lot of your meadows would have, you know, probably be well on their way. The lower areas will all be fried, but you'll still have some alpine stuff going on later on in the year, and some different things coming. I've never been late July, so I couldn't really tell you. I'm sure there will be some things of interest, but it sort of depends what you want to go for. You know, if there are certain things you want to see, you know, you perhaps want to stick, because you'll often see a flowering period. It will say, oh, flowers from June to August, but the peak may well be much earlier. There may be just a few hanging on in August. So it's sort of, you know.
Yeah. It's hard to get everything in June, isn't it?
It's possible to go. I need to go back in July sometime as well, because I want to see all the gentians and stuff flowering higher up. For me, at least, when I go in June, seems to be some sort of sweet spot where I can catch things lower down, things higher up, you know, and plenty of both. So it seems to work out well. But I don't think you'd miss out if you prepared to sort of get up high and probably walk as well.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. The roads will only go so high, and then you're really just relying on your own legs to get beyond, which is fine if you like that sort of thing.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Hi, Chris. I'm not Liz, as you can see. I'm just wondering, I'm going to Kyrgyzstan in April with, not with you, with Green Tours, actually. Sorry about that. I just wondered what the infrastructure is like.
I'll say that.
I just wonder what the infrastructure is like compared to, I've been to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan.
Yeah, the roads are probably a bit rougher on average in Kyrgyzstan. It's a little more basic in places. It's not quite as developed as some parts.
Yeah.
I have no idea the itinerary or where you're staying, but you're not going to be getting the Ritz all the time or anything like that. Some of the roads, as I say, can be not great. It's one of the poorest stans. So
yeah, I picked that up in Kazakhstan. The van was very close to the border with Kyrgyzstan, and we were stopped by the police who thought we might be harboring some migrants.
You do go right along next to it at times, don't you? And just a barbed wire fence between you and the border. Yeah, you're on the other side.
Well, thank you. That's all whetted my appetite for this conversation.
Unprepared is what I'll say.
I might even bump into you there. With the,
you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay. Is there anyone else at all?
All right. Well, going, isn't it?
It is going. Should also add that Chris is going to be doing I saw someone mention it in the comments there, but Chris will be doing a lecture as part of the AGS conference. Won't you, Chris? On Sunday the 23rd.
Yeah, Flora, Turkey.
Flora, Turkey.
Talking about where I'm sitting now. Yeah, one of the great flower countries in the world, without a doubt.
Chris, will that one that you're doing on Turkey, will that be available to watch at another time? It's a loving 2 a.m. in the morning for us. I don't guarantee I'll get up.
No, Ollie can answer that. I'm not sure if it's. I guess they're recording it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll check it out.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure we looked into that yet, but it's something we should look into. We could potentially do a live Zoom feed.
I assumed you were going to be doing it. You're going to have some sort of,
Oh, thanks, Chris.
Broadcast. Well, I thought so. Yeah. I mean,
Okay, thanks everyone for watching. Next month it's David Richter, Tom Freeth, and Beth. I can't remember her second name right now. Doing a talk about this year's AGS study tour, and then we've got Razvan doing the Gran Sasso and the Abruzzi Mountains in December. So hopefully see you all then. Thanks. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.